Okay. So for my presentation, I decided to do consciousness and disorders of consciousness. So what made me want to do this topic was I was actually fell into like a bit of a rabbit hole on TikTok, and it was like people talking about like their experiences being in a coma. And I didn't realize like everyone has a different experience when they're in a coma. Like people experience different things, are like aware of different things, and then just remember it after differently. So this is like an article I found, and it was a bunch of different people and like their experiences being in a coma. So it was like hearing everything around you, complete darkness, out of body experience, hallucinations, imagining a whole new life, like a dream, but like living like they thought they were still living basically, and then being stuck in a long dream. So I thought that was really interesting. So it made me want to like kind of do some research on it. So this is kind of the order that I'm going to go in for this presentation. Um, so what is consciousness? It's basically like a summary of it would be like the ability to take unconscious impulses and turn them into voluntary actions. And on like a more micro level, it'd be taking like pre-conscious brain activity and turning it into conscious intention. So yeah, the organization of the conscious brain is done in networks. So there's small world networks that help the human brain like communicate more efficiently and like high thought patterns basically, and it uses less energy. And then the functional brain network organization, it's organized so for high level info to be circulated and conveyed. And it's really important for like conscious awareness and what makes us like conscious of what's happening around us. So this orders of consciousness is kind of more like what I wanted to focus on. So two key terms for that are comatose or a coma state. You're not conscious, you're not awake, but you're still alive. Um, and then obviously, like with a coma, some people go into medically induced comas and people go into just comas from accidents. And then you don't always wake up from a coma, which is like always the risk with that. And then the vegetative state is a little different. It's you're awake, but you're not aware, basically. So, regional cerebral metabolism of glucose is a way to track brain function and figure out um, if your brain is like working and conscious of and having like action and movement in it. So, yeah, it's an indicator of brain function, and they use it to like determine levels of consciousness. So there was one study that found vegetative state patients had really high metabolic rates in their primary visual cortex, but reduced metabolism in other brain areas, which is really interesting. Um, and had a lower like overall reduction than the coma groups did of the metabolism. And also, the article discussed how younger ages recover better from like loss of consciousness, like from having a coma than an older person would, which I feel like makes sense. So, the brain of a comatose patient, this was like one of my sources was a study that focused on this, and they found no retention of a tracer in the brain or brainstem, and then slices through the brain. It was like a patient who had like went to a coma and then had like major brain surgery, basically. And the slices through the brain had no intracerebral activity. And they also found no cerebral glucose metabolism like anywhere. And then this is like the EEG scan of it. And so this is like kind of an older article. It's from 1995. So I think that's why this picture looks kind of weird. And then this is just like normal brain, like a more modern EEG. I don't know exactly if they've gotten like more high quality or something, because but I think this one, like obviously just like it doesn't look normal. So that was like what was going on in the comatose brain. Neural connections. So in coma patients, there's a lower number of connections. Then also with patients who had preserved global functional connectivity patterns, they found like, but they still had like disorders of consciousness. They found they still had a significant number of these connections, but the connections themselves had completely reorganized themselves. And then brain dynamics between day and night. One article like aimed to figure out if the dynamics are different for disorder of consciousness patients between day and night. And they used EEG waveforms and circadian organization to figure this out. And they found that there are minimal changes for people with disorders of consciousness between day and night. So I think it may be that that disorder of consciousness kind of goes hand in hand with like losing a bit of like circadian rhythm and like consciousness altogether. So diagnosing and understanding these disorders. So these are just three different tools that I found in my research. So brain computer interface was used specifically for completely locked in state patients. And using these brain computer interfaces helped them identify these completely locked in state patients and like the level of where their consciousness was at, and then like going a step further, determining if they did have a disorder of consciousness. And then the Glasgow Coma Scale is a pretty common one that they use. And it's just, they use it to measure the neurological status of a patient and basically like where their consciousness is at. And one study I did talked about the coma scale and then also kind of talked about its effectiveness. And it was, they took a group of nurses and they gave them like an education intervention. Um, and it helped them all like understand the coma scale better. So it's definitely really important to people working in healthcare. And then there's the generalized Ising model, which captures the relationship between anatomical structures and spontaneous fluctuations of healthy controls, and generalizable for disorders of consciousness patients. They found that using this model, the generalizable or the dimensionality increased for these patients and helped them distinguish and diagnose disorders of consciousness among patients. So overall, I really found that consciousness is a very broad and somewhat difficult to measure phenomenon. I think a big part of consciousness definitely goes beyond science. I know it's a very theoretical thing. It's really big in philosophy and cognitive science. So it definitely made the research for this like a little bit harder because it was really hard to find empirical articles versus just normal like literature articles. And consciousness can be greatly affected by brain injury. So it's a very sensitive thing. And people with just orders of consciousness have abnormal brain chemistry. They go hand in hand. The good thing is that the medical and science community has developed tools and technologies to determine and diagnose disorders of consciousness, and they do know a good amount about those. So it's a very high tech thing. And then these are my references. So that's it.